It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander and focus on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing it. That's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe. Consider checking out the links down in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're reaching back and covering a commander I don't believe I've ever covered before. And I figure with all the new counter support, it's fun to start taking looks at mechanics around the counters. And I thought I would take a look at Xavier Sal, Infested Captain. A 3-mana Sultai legend who can tap to remove a counter from another permanent we control to populate, only at sorcery speed. So populate is going to be choose a token of a creature we control and make a copy of it. Or you can sacrifice a creature we control to proliferate at sorcery speed. Both these are really interesting abilities, and I think the fun of Xavier Sal is that we can build a deck that takes advantage of both. Although I do think we're going to lean a little bit more into proliferate. I think both can be really useful for us. So anytime we broach the topic of proliferating, the question becomes, what are we going to proliferate upon? What's the goal? You know, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. We're going to kind of tie our game plan to 3 tethers: Super Friends, Planeswalkers, counters, and then poison counters on our opponents, right? Infect, poison damage, that kind of thing. I think with these 3, we're going to find enough love to proliferate upon, and we're going to try to play, Planeswalkers that can make tokens so we can sack those creatures to proliferate and have some fun. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit earlier for just $1 a month, consider checking it out down below. Well, all right. It's not just Xavier Sal that cares about proliferating. Like we can proliferate more ways. Vraska is an example of a planeswalker that can proliferate herself. Her 0 lets you draw a card and lose a life and proliferate. Marvin, Murderous Mimic, says it has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as it, meaning it basically gets to become a second copy of Xavier Sal that can tap and use his abilities. Tekathal says that if we were to proliferate once, we would actually proliferate twice instead, which is really nice. Ripples of Potential is a spell that can protect our permanents while proliferating. Ichor Gauntlet gives all of our planeswalkers the ability to just pay 0, use a 0 loyalty ability to proliferate, which effectively makes it a +1, and a -12 to take an extra turn. And it says whenever you cast a 9-creature spell, you can choose a counter on target permanent and put an additional 1 on it. So we can increase the counters on our permanents that way. And then Sting would be even better if Xavier Sal could use its abilities at instant speed. Because it can basically only use it on sorcery speed, what Sting is going to do is untap Xavier Sal at the start of our combat so that he can tap again right on our turn. We have some ways to untap Xavier Sal and let him use his abilities again, but this is just a nice, easy way to do it, and it can allow Xavier Sal to tap the turn he comes in if we have the mana to attach it. Okay. Well, Super Friends, Planeswalkers, who are we going to play? Well, the goal here was to try to pick Planeswalkers that make tokens so that you always have fodder for Xavier Sal to sacrifice to proliferate. So you have things like Garrett, Curse Huntman that can make the wolves, and when the wolves die, you put counters on Garrett. Liliana makes that 2/2 zombie. Lolth can make the spiders. Both Lolth and Liliana have abilities whenever creatures die. Liliana draws us cards. Lolth allows us to put counters on her. Garrick, like I said, when his wolves die, put counters on him. And each of them do at least do something really interesting. Garrick lets us get up to that big -60 of all of our board, +3/+3 in trample. Liliana has that brutal -4 to have everybody sacrifice 2 creatures of their choice. And then Lolth can draw us a card and loses a life, but a lot of times it's really just making those spiders to fund those things. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, can make a plant, but can also put a counter on each creature we control, which is huge, right? So we can start proliferating the counters upon them. Teferi, Master of Time, lets us draw and discard on everybody's turn. It can use its abilities in instant speed, and then it can phase things out and eventually working its way up to taking 2 extra turns. And then the Teferi from the Brothers' War says whenever we draw a card, we put a counter on him. But he can make spirits that grow with a counter every time we draw a card. And once you get 1 counter on them, right, then we could start proliferating more counters on these spirits, right, and turning them into a threat. Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler, lets our creatures activate abilities as though they had haste. This is pretty fun because then, Xavier Sal could use it the turn it comes in. But the key thing that's great about Tyvar is this +1 being able to untap a creature, basically untapping Xavier Sal, letting him use his ability again. Kartha Lion, whenever it comes in or dies, or a Planeswalker we control dies, we look at the top 7 and can get a Planeswalker funneling them into our hand, and then it allows all of our Planeswalkers' ability to cost an additional +1. So, for example, with Tyvar to the left, the +1 will become a +2, and the -2 will become a -1. So you can sort of see where that can affect your Planeswalker's loyalty abilities. And then the Chain Veil, beginning your end step, if you didn't activate a Planeswalker ability, you'll lose 2 life. And then for 4 mana, you could basically get an extra activation off of each of your Planeswalkers. Remember, you can only activate a Planeswalker once per turn. This basically is going to let you do it twice per turn for all your Planeswalkers. The more you have, the better the Chain Veil is going to become. Well, okay. So that's Super Friends. How about counters? Well, there's a lot of ways you can look at this. My thought was try to find creatures that can get counters on everything. Things like Master Biomancer gives every creature that comes in counters on it equal to its powers, non-token and token, so that's pretty great. Or a Boroid, that new card Fetch of Eternities can just pass counters out at the start of each of our combats, giving us options to proliferate upon. Remember that Xavier Sal has to use his ability at sorcery speed, so if our Boroid puts counters on at the start of combat, we'd want to, of course, use his ability in our second main, right, to take advantage of that. We have artifacts like Astral Cornucopia and Ever-Flowing Chalice on the next page that come in with a certain amount of charge counters on it, depending on how much mana we pay, and then tap for either as many mana as a color of our choice for each charge counter for the Cornucopia, or colorless mana for the Ever-Flowing Chalice, depending on how many counters are on it. And that's a big deal because right over the course of the game, that means more and more mana. Magistrate Scepter, as long as we can get a charge counter on it, we can move 3 of them to take an extra turn, so not a bad way to proliferate and get some extra counters on it. Replicating Ring gets a night counter, and then when he has 8 or more of them on there, you remove all of them and make a bunch of extra copies of Replicating Ring, just really giving you more mana and more access to things. Innkeeper's Talent can help you hand out counters each turn and protect your permanents with counters on them. Simic Ascendancy, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature control, you put that many growth counters on the Ascendancy, and if you hit 20 on Ascendancy on your upkeep, you win the game. Good way to give us an extra win con there. And then Terra Symbiosis, that new one, whenever one or more counters are put on a creature we control, we can draw that many cards. We get to choose when to do this. At minimum, it'll be the proliferate, right, when we're putting potentially 1 counter on something. But at maximum, maybe it's Boroid passing out, 4 counters to every creature, and we can draw 4 cards. Like, there's different ways Terra Symbiosis can draw us cards, but you can kind of see that there's going to be examples of when you might be able to get more than 1 card for it. And kind of in conjunction with the Super Friends, we're also going to care about tokens, where we need creatures to sacrifice for Xavier Sal to proliferate. So there's a lot of ways we can look at that. Ajax and Neb just doubles all the tokens we would make. Again, this is great for his first ability, right? The Populate. We could still do that, right? Take counters, have something to make tokens. So Ajax kind of works in that sense. You have things like Mycoloth and Tendershoe Dryad. They're going to try to make tokens at a bunch. So Tendershoe Dryad makes a sapling on everybody's turn. Mycoloth is going to make a sapling on our upkeep for each counter on it. Now, it can come in and devour to put counters on it, or if we can get counters on it other way, right, then Mycoloth's just going to make us some tokens. You have things like Doppelgang, which can make a bunch of copies of certain things. Note that Doppelgang can target our opponent's things and target any permanent, meaning we can copy lands, we can copy artifacts. Obviously, if we can copy a creature with Doppelgang, then we can populate with Xavier Sal to make more copies of it. And there are some wacky lines you can make with the Doppelgang, even for just 1 or 2 into the X to make some good value. City of Death makes you a treasure, and then 5 turns of making a token that's a copy of a non-saga token you control. So get a token of something, and then you can get more of it. Extravagant Replication just makes a copy of any non-land permanent you control at the beginning of your upkeep. It's a very interesting ability and can be pretty useful depending on what we have out and what we can copy. And then, of course, we're going to round out with poison counters. There's a lot of way to look at this. You have some of the newer creatures that have Toxic, like Bloated Contaminator or Contaminant Grafter. Remember, Toxic says if this creature would hit an opponent in combat, they get a poison counter. Now, Contaminator and Contaminant Grafter both give us a way to proliferate. Bloated says whenever it hits a player, you proliferate. Contaminant says whenever 1 or more creatures we control hit 1 or more players, we proliferate. So only a maximum of 1 proliferate with Grafter per turn. So again, here's a way to get an extra proliferate, right, per turn by hitting our opponents. And then the Grafter adds the Corrupted, Whereas if opponent has 3 or more poison counters, we can get a land in for free. Now, Phyrexian Swarmlord has Infect, so whenever it hits a player, they get that many poison counters. And then makes us a bunch of Phyrexian Insect tokens with Infect for each poison counter our opponents have. So, we're going to get more and more of those tokens over time. Skittles is a big 4/4 flyer in the air with Infect. And, right, with having flying means with potentially some evasion, we can get in and get those poison counters in on our opponents to start proliferating upon. Infectious Inquirer gives everybody a poison counter. Ferocious Outbreak gives everybody a poison counter and then does some board wiping potential for each, poison counter our opponents have. Infectious Bite, Prologue to Phresis, these are both giving everybody a poison counter. The point here is it's a way to start, right? It's a basis to get all of our opponents a counter to start so that we can start proliferating upon them. And then you have things like Tainted Strike, which are going to give a creature Infect till end of turn if they don't get blocked, and they can get some good damage in. Grafted Exoskeleton, Phresis, giving our creatures Infect, giving a specific creature Infect so they can take advantage of hitting people in combat, giving them poison counters that way. Same thing with Vraska's Fault, just handing out a poison counter. There's a lot of ways to approach poison counters, but again, we want to try to get enough of them on everybody so that at least one on everybody so we can start proliferating, right, and making that another threat that our opponents have to deal with. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first shot at Xavier, and I think going into testing, the question is, do we need more proliferate? Like, Azuri has an interesting ability to draw a card every time you proliferate, which is a really cool idea. I think because we were trying to play the spread in the deck, I didn't really bring Azuri in, but I think it's an interesting point, especially since you can have it come in and proliferate twice for 3 mana. So 7 mana basically gives you 2 proliferates and 2 draws, which at the right time, makes a huge difference. Mutational Advantage is just more protection for our board. And then I love the idea of something like Promise of Aclazotz. So at the beginning of our end step, you could sack a non-demon to populate. My thought there is maybe you could trade a cheap token you don't really care about for a token of a better token, right? You can kind of turn one into the other. It's not as guaranteed, but I think it's an interesting way to kind of add value to this weird board that we're trying to accomplish. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get into some gameplay scenarios, kind of understand what hands are we looking for and how are we going to set this thing on up. So here we're looking at a 4-lander. We have all of our colors. We have the Triumph there. We have the Flooded Grove. Karn's Bastion can proliferate on the land. We see the Gauntlets, where all we're missing is a Planeswalker. We see Ominous Seas, going to get counters on it whenever we draw cards. And then you can remove 8 counters on it to get a nice big Kraka token. Again, not a bad thing to proliferate. And then Freed from the Wheel is actually a way to untap Xavier Sal for just a blue mana. So, if we have enough creature tokens, we could really start taking advantage of that. Turn 1, we see Skittles, which is a great draw. The only problem is we just don't have a second black source. Well, there we go. It got answered for us. There's our second black force for Skittles, and we'll get Ominous Sea started. Here, I think I'll just get the Palisson. I guess I could go here and go Xavier, but I really don't see that being a good line. We could get the Gauntlet in, but I think I'd rather just get the tap land in and keep ourselves going. There's the Replicating Ring. So remember, the ring automatically gets the counter on our upkeep, right? And then, we could start proliferating. So I'm kind of wondering if it's worth, taking the turn here to get the Replicating Ring down. It feels weird, right? Because what's my other option? I guess the Gauntlet. I mean, to me, it just kind of makes sense. Come into the next turn, counter there when we draw, counter there for the night counter. Now and go Xavier Sal. There's Ferocious Outbreak, can at least get the poison counter started, but I kind of like just something like Skittles here, get it really set up for next turn. We don't have the black mana to give it, or we do have the black mana, sorry, off the Replicating Ring to give it haste. So we can give somebody 4 poison counters, probably, right? Pick somebody who doesn't have any flyers, get the party started. And now as we come into our next turn, I guess I could, with Karn's Bastion, proliferate this turn. But I'd almost rather Xavier Sal attack another player with Skittles and then Ferocious Outbreak. Because then 2 players are going to have 4, one player is gonna, two players will end up with 5 because the outbreak is because we've attacked 2 different players with Skittle. One's gonna end up with 1, and then you're gonna do this and help wipe the board. I just don't have any creatures that I want to sacrifice to proliferate, but I mean, we're getting close. We, again, unfortunately don't have a creature to populate either, but I think we're getting in good spots here, because now on this turn, we could get the Freed for the Real on Xavier Sal. Again, we just don't really have that good of an options, but we can hit the third player with Skittles, and then just proliferate with Karn's Bastion, which would get some more counters here. Now, right, 2 players would be at 6, 1 player would be at 5, and we're now starting to really threaten the poison counters, even if somebody, right, gets rid of Skittles. Vraska's Fall, there's number 7. Here's number 8. Right, we still have enough to proliferate, so that would be 7 and 8. So Skittles could potentially take somebody out this turn with its poison, and then gets the other 2 very, very close. Obviously, this game was a little bit more of a poison-driven game, but again, that's the point of the deck, is to kind of have that 3-pronged attack to how we can accumulate proliferating, right? And so Skittles attacks somebody. If it doesn't knock them out, the Vraskas is going to knock them out when they get a poison counter, and then you proliferate, and the other 2 either have to find a way to deal with Skittles or just stop us from proliferating, which is going to be very difficult, right, because of the Bastion. And that's why I think that the Proliferate is such a beautiful engine. Not only that, but remember that Ominous Seas can start making the Krakens by removing 8 counters. So I think by this line, this would get pretty close, and if it wouldn't, it would be their next turn, and that would give us the ability to sack that token to Xavier Sal to proliferate, right? So I think we'd be pretty darn close to getting everybody next turn, if not, another person this turn. But again, that's just the one of the pronged, things to our attack. Here we get a little bit more of a super hand, a super friendly hand. We have a 3-lander, no black, but we have Farseek and Astral Cornucopia. So we have plenty of ways to get black. We also have 2 planeswalkers. Again, turn 1 and 2, I think, is just going to come down to doing this. I think you might as well just Farseek for the Triome. Round out those colors, right? Make sure that we're not going to have an issue. 4 mana here. I can Astral for 1. If I do that, I'm not really getting much down. But I guess it could set up for next turn. You can only put the same value into X, so we can only pay 3 into X. Now here's 6 mana. I like to have something like the Binding, but I kind of feel like it's what Garrett can make the Wolves. I could go Xavier plus Nissa and put a plant on the battlefield and try to set up for the next turn. That could be an interesting option. Tick her up to make the plant. That allows me to then sack the plant next turn to proliferate, which is pretty cool. So we could sack the plant now to proliferate, which would get this up to 2 and, this up to 5. If I do that, then I have 7 mana. Does that change my line? I mean, I guess I could get Adrix down and make more plants, right, with Nissa. Basically, just my thought here is try to get more things, and then I'd probably just sack 1 to Xavier Sal to proliferate. Right. My thought there is then we can get more plants to fund, right, Xavier Sal tapping to proliferate. Right. I guess we could have also, -2 to put a counter on each of them, but then we would have lost our only plant. I mean, we have 3 mana. We could run the Freeze's Outlook if we want to, but if we're gonna do that, I just don't know if we're gonna get enough, enough juice from our squeeze here with probably only getting -1/-1 to our opponents. I'd rather do it when we know we're gonna proliferate with Xavier Sal, and then at least we can end up with more counters on it. All right, well, there's the Chalice. So the Chalice at the moment could have 3 counters on it. And we could proliferate on it. If I do that, it'd be 1, 2, 3. That's only 4 mana. And if I proliferate, that's only 5 mana, and that's not enough to get something like Garrick down. Garrick, I'm kind of feeling like is the answer this turn. 0 to make the wolves. Remember when the wolves die, they put loyalty counters on Garrick. My thought is sack a plant to Xavier Sal to proliferate. Like we could sack the wolf, but my thought here is then if I wanted to like -2 Nissa, um, I guess we could have -2 Nissa before we sacked the plant, so that we, all of these would have counters on them, right? Um, and then now, I do have a mana left, so I guess I could just chalice. I could have chaliced for 0, but then I don't have a charge counter on it to proliferate, right? But now my thought is, we're in better shape. I just realized we would have made 4 wolves because of Adrix. But again, now you can start to see we've got this wider board going. We have the counters going. And now, we could freeze this outbreak if we want to. Or we can just continue to make wolves. We could just -6 Garrick right now and get the emblem. But if we're gonna do that, we're better off just proliferating first so it doesn't die, right? Nissa could probably just -2 again to put counters and everything and before we proliferate, right? And I think we're just in a good shape here with our counters. If somebody wipes the board, we've got the Deluge for a future turn to wipe the board back. If we're planning to do nothing with our mana this turn, which it doesn't seem like it, this game plan would require nothing mana-wise. Just go in the Chalice for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, go in the Chalice for 4, and then get it to be proliferated, right? So it would be 5 next turn. And I think we're in good shape to just continue to build our board at that point. And -6 for Garrick to make all of our wolves threats. And then if they die, you just get the counters on Garrick. And I think we're just back in the same spot where we could just make more wolves, right? Here we're keeping a 2-lander. We do have the rampant growth, so we can get to 3 for the Patriarch Seals. Patriarch Seals another way to untap Xavier Sal. We see Doppelgang, we see the Outbreak, and we see Master Biomancer, which can get some counters in. So we see the island. I actually think it would have made more sense to go Cemetery in the island so that we could crack this rampant growth. Thinking Swamp should be fine. And then now coming into this turn, unfortunately, we didn't hit the land, so we kind of need to get the Patriarch Seal in, right? Just so we have access to more mana. No land again is particularly brutal, but we could go with the Seas, but I'm just kind of thinking Biomancer. Gosh, we're getting killed. Getting killed on the lack of lands, but I think I would just go like 2 into the Chalice. If I go 2 into the Chalice, that's my turn. If I go 1 into the Chalice, I could play the Seas and at least get a basis for that. Or get that started. Come into our next turn to counter and still no lands. Jeez, right now I'm tapping for 5 mana, so it'd just be 1 into the Doppelgang, which doesn't feel right. Could get the Scepter in, but I really don't have enough mana to get anything on it. We could bite just to give everybody a poison counter. My thought is Xavier Sal comes in with 2 counters, and then we could bite somebody's creature at least to get the poison counter started if we wanted to. But again, the problem is we're running out of things to sacrifice. Right, we have nothing to sacrifice, right, for the purposes of Xavier Sal's ability. Well, there's a land. Still only at 4. Like ideally need to start proliferating, but I really don't want to give up Biomancer to do it. Because right now I'm at, what, 6 mana? If I proliferate, I'm at 7 because of the Chalice. That would still only be 1 into the Doppelgang. Potentially within the land, I could get to 2. I could put the Magistrate Scepter in, at least, and get it down. Crack the landscape. Just to try to shuffle the library up a little bit. And then yeah, I think that's got to be it. Unfortunately, I mean, with the lack of lands is a little bit brutal there. There we see Mirkwood Bats. So I'm at 4, 5, 6 mana right now. My thought is play Mirkwood, sack Biomancer to Xavier Sal to Proliferate. And my thought here is just to try to get a little bit more mana. Sorry, that would come in with 2 counters because that's Biomancer's power, and then these would each get a counter. Now my thought is on a future turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm pretty darn close to getting getting a doppelgang for a decent amount. I mean, right now we need 8 to be at 2. And my thought there is land plus, like, I don't know, a chalice or plus Mirkwood or something. I really would have loved to have had the mana this turn to go after the scepter, because that would have been 4. I still have just the 2, just 3 mana, right? I can't activate that scepter. I was gonna say a land there might have fixed it, but this is a brutal hand. Not seeing the lands is just really odd. I mean, if Autumn seizes at 6, I mean, we might get there, removing counters to populate those Krakens. This just is odd. 4, 5, 6, 7. I could sack Mirkwood to Proliferate, but that just doesn't seem right. I could try to get Mirkwood in with the Tainted Strike if I wanted to this turn. Maybe go like Pheresis Outbreak, try it again with the Tainted Strike, just to try to get something going on that way. If I want to put something on the Scepter, I only have 3 mana, so maybe it's Pheresis plus get a counter on the Scepter. And come to the next turn. Jeez. Just no lands. I think we got to call this one. I mean, pretty clearly we're at the lack of, the shuffler. They're not giving us lands, and I think we've saw enough on that one. Let's go one more. 3-lander here with some mana ramp in the Arcane Signet. There's the Gauntlet, Tennishoe Dryad, and then Bloodroot Apothecary is an interesting card. So it says Toxic 2. Whenever it enters, us and a target opponent each get a treasure, and then whenever an opponent sacks a non-creature token, that player gets 2 poison counters. The intention here is try to hit your opponents using treasures, so things like that with poison counters. So here, get the Triome in, get the Signet in. 4 mana, so we're just one off of Tennishoe Dryad, which is going to really get us started. I think just Xavier Sal. And then, unfortunately, the hollow comes in tapped because I only have 1 basic. Maybe Teferi. Teferi could start drawing us through. I kind of like trying to get the Gauntlet in first, because then when I get Teferi in, he can actually proliferate every turn, which is kind of interesting. And then here, Teferi for 4. I've got 2 mana left. Or do I just Tennishoe Dryad and try to get my way back around with the saplings? That's an option. I think Teferi 0 to proliferate. If everyone lets me, I think I would just 0 to proliferate on everybody else's turns, right? And then Tennishoe for 5. I've got 2 mana left. Try to go after the Tainted Strike, but I think we just try to come back around, right, with the saplings. We do have the option to now just crank Teferi to take 2 extra turns, but I think it makes sense to try to keep it alive and take 2 extra turns. So if I were freed from the reel on Xavier Sal, that would be able to put a counter there because of the Gauntlet. And then I could -10 Teferi to take 2 extra turns. I don't know that fixes. How do I do this? 1, 2, 3. I'd have 2 blue mana, so I could untap him twice. So I could basically sack 3 creatures to proliferate 3 times. So that would be 14. He would go -10 to go down to 4. And then would get 2 extra turns to try to get some more value in. I guess that's an interesting line. I can also start digging with Teferi instead. Draw a discard. I guess I could have been doing that. Tainted Strike feels like a really interesting option. I think I'd probably just -10 here. Take the 2 extra turns. Let's draw a discard and just see what happens. It's the Symbiosis. Oh, sorry, no, we can't draw a discard. I apologize, because we -10, right? So we can't. That would have to be the next turn. So we come into the next turn, right? And we could go Terra Symbiosis, put a counter here. 1, 2, 3. I'd still have 3 blue left to untap Xavier Sal if I want to, and that would net me another sapling. What? Draw discard on Teferi. Draw discard. I can get up to 9 by doing this 3. Sorry, sack 1. I basically give up 4 saplings to. I can untap 3 times, so I could proliferate 4 times, right? Untap for the next turn. Get another sapling. Like, obviously, this can't sustain itself forever because we just don't have enough to keep sacking. Take Teferi up, draw discard, Assassin's Trophy. Okay. I mean, you can -10 Teferi again, but I feel like we're running out of gas here. We unfortunately just couldn't get the right pieces. I think if we had had a way to get a counter onto I think if we had a way to get a counter onto our board at all, this would have been a different game. We start proliferating up. Xavier Sal could become a threat with the Tainted Strike. But I think we just missed the line. I think on that one, unfortunately. Goes to show you that probably we need to pick. Probably need to pick either only 2 of the 3 lanes, or I think we could, with some work, make the lanes look a little bit better. But let me know, what do you think of Xavier Sal down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all in the next.